important conversation about the value of the refugee program and the recent impacts of the reexamination. Hi, all. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jenny Murray, President and CEO of the National Immigration Forum. We go by the tag name The Forum because we truly love to bring together leaders across faith, law enforcement, national security, and business from all different perspectives to bring together important solutions so that we are all participating and advocating for the value of immigrants and immigration to the nation. And you've joined us today because we have two incredible experts with us here to talk about the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program and recent new actions and operations that are calling for a reexamination to one of the most important programs in our modern immigration system. So I'm joined by two incredible experts today, Matt Sorens of World Relief and Max Feinberg of Chobani. So I'm going to introduce both of them to you and turn the mic to them as quickly as possible so you can hear their incredible expertise. Matt serves as the Vice President of Advocacy and Policy at World Relief and as the National Coordinator of the Evangelical Immigration Table. He is the co-author of Welcome the Stranger, Justice, Compassion, Truth in the Immigration Debate, and also the book Inalienable, How Marginalized Kingdom Voices Can Help Save the American Church. He's a graduate both of Wheaton College, where he's also an adjunct faculty member, and also a graduate of DePaul University. Matt, we're really excited to have you with us today.
Yeah, I was glad to be with you, Jenny.
And Max Feinberg. Max is Vice President of Government Affairs at Chobani. He plays an active role in our own corporate roundtable here at the Forum, where Chobani is a founder and co-chair, and we're very thankful for their partnership, as we are of World Relief's amazing partnership. Max has nearly 3 decades of experience working to end hunger and poverty in the U.S. and around the world, most recently as the president and CEO of Growing Hope Globally, formerly Foods Resource Bank. He has also served as the director of the United Nations World Food Program and the Alliance to End Hunger. Feinberg has held positions at almost every agency, but we'll say U.S. Department of Agriculture, Department of State, AmeriCorps Vista, and the U.S. Congress, and of course is now a leader at Chobani. We're so thankful to have you both with us. I joke because I have a Max and a Matt in my immediate family, so you guys hang with me because I am going to throw these names around, but we're so glad to have both of you and to be able to work with you for so long on this important set of collaborations. So unfortunately, we don't come together for a really great purpose. We have had an incredible, robust refugee resettlement program for nearly 100 years in its entirety, but robustly at least the last 50 plus years in our country. And we have seen in the last several years so much of that ground softened and so many hits that we never anticipated, really weakening the U.S. Refugee program. And so, Matt, I'm going to turn it to you very quickly to first just stabilize us, help us know what's the history of the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program, and give us just a few top lines of what it's been and what the value of the program has been.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. So first of all, just under U.S. law and also under international law, a refugee is a subset of immigrants, specifically defined by the fact that they are people who are outside of their country, who have a well-founded fear of persecution that is on account of their race, their religion, their political opinion, their national origin, or their membership in a particular social group. So that's been the case. I mean, that's the definition that goes back to the 1950s, at a time when various countries were coming together and wanted to make sure that we didn't, as a world, make the mistakes that we made in the days going up into the Holocaust, when Jewish people fled persecution and were turned away by countries like the United States in some cases. And that was then formalized into U.S. law in the 1980 Refugee Act, which I like to remind people was passed with unanimous support in the U.S. Senate. We don't get a lot of legislation that has that effect recently. Very broad support in the House as well. And that process outlined, this has been happening, as you said, kind of informally in an ad hoc basis prior to that. But starting in 1980, in a very formalized way, the US government makes the determination overseas that someone is indeed a refugee, that they have that well-founded fear of persecution. Of course, also that they're no way a threat to public safety or public health. There's a very extensive vetting process involved. It's, of course, a very small share of the world's refugees that get selected for resettlement to the United States. So 2024 was sort of a high year in recent years. It was about 100,000 refugees, and that's out of 40 million refugees in the world. So, 1/4 of 1% in a high year, and it's gone dramatically down since then. Once those individuals would be chosen for a settlement, there are a small number of national organizations, most of them faith-based, like World Relief, who work through a number of local offices and affiliate organizations to receive refugees when they arrive, to make sure that they know how to find jobs, get kids into school, make sure that they can have access to learning English, get all their documentation sorted out. They are lawfully present from the moment that they arrive. I think that's important to underscore in this moment because there's a lot of confusion. And then under the law, 1 year after arrival, they are eligible for their green card, but not until 1 year after arrival. So though they are legally present, authorized to work from the moment they arrive, they don't get their formal lawful permanent resident card till at least 1 year after arrival. And so for World Relief, we've been a part of that program since 1979 in its sort of early versions. We've resettled many, many refugees over those years, along with serving lots of other immigrants of other backgrounds as well. And we do so at World Relief right along with our mission in partnership with the church. So our staff do an amazing job of welcoming people, but we also lean very heavily on teams from local churches, what we call a good neighbor team, to be a part of helping people through that integration process for those first initial months, and then, less intensively, but over a longer term as well.
Thank you, Matt. We have so much more to hear from you. But actually, I know Max does need to, he's avoiding the winter storm and needs to be with us just very quickly. And we want to make sure to also hear your experience, Max, and especially the employer voice. So can you share with us how have refugees been an important part of the U.S. workforce since 1980, even before, but specifically, and why has Chobani participated as a hosting employer? And then, if you want to, Max, just because you have to leave, dive straight into how is the current context affecting you all?
Yep. Thank you, Jenny. And yes, I'm thrilled to be with you, the forum, with my friend Matt, and apologize in advance to everybody joining that I do have to dash before initially planned, given winter weather here in upstate New York. I first connected with the National Immigration Forum when I was at the White House and the Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships Office, and joined from an outside perspective, the Bibles, Badges, and Businesses coalition that you guys have done such a great job pulling together. And from that place, I was part of the Bibles, part of the three-legged stool. Now I get to be a representative of the business side. I don't know if anybody will ever give me a badge, but anyway, it's the process that Matt laid out is one that everybody should know. This subset of immigrants is very different, unbelievably robust vetting process that starts with the UN, goes through the State Department, gets to the Department of Health and Human Services with grants to faith-based groups like World Relief, and then they land in places around the country through local partners like the Center in Utica, New York, near where I am now, or the Refugee Center in Twin Falls, both of which have partnered with local employers like us to make sure they get jobs. Why? Because as our founder and CEO, a Turkish immigrant, not a refugee, himself, Hamdi Ulukaya, says, the day a refugee gets a job is the day they stop being a refugee. And this is something he's felt very deeply for the 20 years he's been the founder and CEO of Chobani, but throughout his life. Again, he didn't come as a refugee, but as an immigrant. He understands the experience more than most, and so has made a commitment to being one of those employers that takes advantage of this legal authorized workforce. As Matt said, again, we got to keep hammering that point. Given all the heat in the immigration debate, a little more light will matter. And this is part of that. So we have been able to grow as a company because of the faithful work of refugees from around the world. Our cafeteria in Twin Falls, Idaho is the most diverse place in the state. I used to think that was hyperbole, and then I spent a lot more time in Idaho, and that's true. And they come from all over the world. So I will say we at Chobani believe in investing in our communities and creating opportunities for everyone. We've always welcomed immigrants as part of our team. They've been an important part of our story and will continue to be. And again, my apologies for jumping early. I'll just end with this. Hamdi, our founder and CEO, cares so much about this that it's also his top priority as a personal philanthropic interest. So a decade ago, he founded the Tent Partnership for Refugees with the single mission of encouraging other employers, other businesses to hire refugees. So I would encourage everybody listening to go take a look at tent.org, the Tent Partnership for Refugees, that provides the roadmap for companies to hire refugees. And I'll end with this, as you asked, Jenny. The current cap, so as you said, 2024, the high water mark of about 100,000 folks, a quarter of 1% of the world refugee population, has dropped well below that and is now capped at 7,500, mostly white Afrikaners, to be resettled under the refugee admission program. And that means that that pipeline of legally authorized immigrants is dried up. And so with the unemployment situation being as tight as the employment situation being as tight as it is, unemployment being as low as it is, numerous industries, not just in food processing, agriculture specifically, construction, hospitality, are faced with an existential crisis. If we close the back door and the side door to immigration, you cannot also lock the front door. And that's what's happening. And again, my apologies. You're in good hands. Matt is fabulous, is an expert. And I encourage you all to take a look at tent.org. And I'm sorry, I have to dash.
Thank you, Max, for joining us. And thank you, Chobani, for your incredible partnership and leadership in this space for so long. I think we should consider a badge for you, Max. So we'll think about that. But thank you for being here. Safe travels. Avoid that storm.
Thank you.
So,
bye.
Yeah. So as we come back now, so now we're layering on. Thank you for sharing with us, where the program has been, and then Max layering on, also where it's been for employers and how great that's been for our economy and also for receiving communities. And then so let's now talk before we jump into the operation that's bringing us together today, which is the Paris operation. Can you layer on just a bit more some of the other just quickly, some of the other restrictions this year, other than the cap, but any other way that the administration and the policy changes that have impacted the refugee resettlement program?
Yeah.
And funding, policy and funding.
There is so much. And I mean, it's hard to, like, it's actually been a year, it's 2 days more than a year, but it's been a very long year. So on the first day of the administration, President Trump fulfilled a campaign promise, and he suspended refugee resettlement on January 20th of last year. So even refugees who'd had their airplane tickets booked, they did not arrive. To add to that, a few days later, on the 24th of January, resettlement agencies like World Relief were informed that not only would there be no future refugee resettlement, at least indefinitely until something else changed, but that the government would not be providing the financial support for refugees who'd been resettled, who were still in their first 90 days in the country, which was not something we'd anticipated. We expected the president, even though we disagreed with him respectfully, to follow through on the campaign pledge to suspend resettlement going forward. We didn't imagine that he would actually take funding away from those who'd already been resettled by the prior administration. And I will say the beautiful thing we saw there, at least, speaking for World Relief, we saw churches and individuals step up. I mean, at World Relief, we raised something like $10 million to help cover housing costs primarily for those refugees. Again, by 3 months, most of them are into a job and are covering their own rent. But it's those first few months that are so critical. And that's what historically the resettlement program has helped to provide that bridge to economic self-sufficiency. Um, as Max said, this refugee program remained basically suspended with very limited exceptions, mostly related to a lawsuit. And then we saw the administration begin to allow individuals who are white, ethnically white individuals from South Africa come in and has categorized them as refugees. Going into fiscal year 2026, which began in October, they're the only group that has been prioritized by the administration. And that means, I think it's really important to say, if you put a 7,500 person cap on refugees, down from 125,000 in prior years, recent years, that means people persecuted for their faith. And in fact, about 30,000 out of 100,000 refugees in fiscal year 2024 were Christian refugees from the countries where Christians face the most severe persecution. It means people persecuted because of their association with the U.S. military, for example, in Afghanistan, or in years past we've seen from Iraq. People fleeing very real wars in places like Ukraine or the Democratic Republic of Congo or Sudan are all excluded. People fleeing persecution on account of their peaceful political activism in Venezuela have been excluded. All of these are people who we would have expected to see had we not seen these changes. So it is a really stark situation. It has impacts on employers, obviously. It has impacts on churches for whom this was a robust ministry that they were happy to, and have been engaging in for decades in some cases, and now very, very limited opportunities to do so. And that's all just on the resettlement program. That's not to speak of sort of refugee-like populations, like those with humanitarian parole, or who may have been given temporary protected status, who have maybe similar stories, but were not formally admitted as refugees. Many of them have already lost their legal status in the last year as well. So it's been a very, very stark, very somber year for refugees and the people who care about them.
And Matt, we should layer on something that I feel like isn't said enough. I mean, all those things you said are incredibly important and heartbreaking in themselves, but many of the folks that are waiting for resettlement, some of them have been designated well over 8, 10, 12, 15 years. Some of them are waiting in refugee camps on lily pad countries, right? Waiting for their placement. Many of them believed they were coming as well. So it's not just, I think some people think that there's a conflict today and then all of a sudden tomorrow someone becomes a refugee. That does happen in people's lives. They are displaced immediately. But the global process, right, is that then the receiving countries then take them as they can. So there's a whole lot of disruption in people's lives, sometimes almost 15 years, right? I was resettling 25 years ago. There was resettling people from Burma who had been waiting 13, 14, 15 years on a lily pad country in a refugee camp. So I think people also don't understand the desperation of many of the people awaiting placement, right? So we
some
should
of them have family members who were resettled previously and were so desperate to be reunited to family members because they went through that refugee experience together. One family got, one part of the family got resettled first for whatever reason and was waiting to be reunited to a spouse or to or a sibling or whatever the case may be.
That's right. It's sort of an indefinite separation. It's so difficult. Yeah. Okay. So we are layering on some difficult things, but let's definitely dive in now. I'm going to give a quick top line, but you are so close to this right now, Matt. So I'm going to bring you back in to talk about what this looks like. But just so folks know what's going on with this Operation PARRIS. What is it? What's happening? I'll give a quick top line. So DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and its own agency, USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, for those of us who don't have the immigration alphabet soup in front of them at all times, has started this new operation that's called PARRIS, PARRIS, Post-Admission Refugee Reverification and Integrity Strengthening. And it's a program that is re-examining thousands of refugee cases through new background checks, which are additional background checks, and intensive verification of refugee claims on top of the ones that have already been done, right? We already call this an extreme vetting. Now this is a re-verification of all of those processes. So right now, USCIS is conducting background checks, re-interviews, re-merit reviews of refugee claims. The initial focus is 5,600 refugees in Minnesota, which we've all been watching unfold on the national stage. And these are folks who have yet to be granted green cards. So they're lawfully received refugees on the way to receive their green card, which is a typical automatic next step of the process, right? And so they're in that limbo. And we've already begun to hear that USCIS is referring some of those cases already to ICE. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So what we know about the target, we know that, like I said, it's 5,600 so far. And that they're being arrested, detained, and transferred to detention centers in Texas, mainly in the Houston area, we've heard most prevalently. And so that's the target. There isn't a limited nationality or ethnic group at this point, although a large number were Somalis kind of early on impacted. So we can talk about that, or Matt, if you have different updates on that. But we do know that they all arrived pretty much primarily during the Biden era. So this is sort of looking back on that administration and that timeline, and looking to reopen these the previous grants of refugee status. And these folks already felt secure, and so reopening that is such a problem. We know that the process involves house-to-house arrests, and like I said, they're being moved out of state. And primarily, we're hearing that even those that are being released, some are being released, so they're being checked and then released. They are just being left in Texas, from what we hear, that they're being told, find your way back home. Even though we moved you here, you need to find your way back to Minnesota. Many people are nervous that this is going to start moving to other states and other folks. And so, Matt, jump in. What do you know about what's going on with Parris? What are you hearing? And what are you all most worried about at World Relief?
Yeah, no, it's been a really difficult. It's been almost 2 weeks now since we became aware that this was starting in Minnesota. I would say we actually first heard back in November that there was this plan to re-adjudicate refugee status determinations. So to be really clear, like we don't have any problem with ICE or USCIS rerunning background checks as many times as they want. If there's some reason to think that someone has a criminal history,
Right.
that's fine. And in fact, that always happens 1 year after arrival as part of the
Mm-hmm.
process of applying for a
That's
green
right.
card. That's appropriate. This is not about public safety questions. They're actually calling into question the determination that this person actually is a refugee, that they actually had a well-founded fear of persecution when they were first approved as a refugee. And why that's incredibly upsetting, even just on its face, is they're saying this for all Biden era refugees, they've said back in November. So about 230,000 people over those 4 years who came in lawfully. I mean, I was talking to my friend, my co-author Isam Smear, who's a psychologist the other day. He mentioned, when he spent a lot of time, doing mental health work with resettled refugees, as well as refugees in camps and other settings overseas. And he said, for a lot of refugees, besides the actual persecution they experienced or sometimes torture that they experienced, the second worst day of their life was the day they had to rehearse all of that in a very extensive interview. It was necessary to verify, to, put the details of their experience on paper. But that we're going to force people to go through all of that again is, I think, really unnecessary and heartbreaking. But what we had anticipated back in November was that this would be, you get a letter in the mail. And again, the Department of Homeland Security knows where every one of these families are. They keep their addresses up to date. They're lawfully present. They were only resettled a year or 2 years, relatively recently. We thought they'd get a letter in the mail that said you need to come to this USCIS office for an interview. And we did think that is inappropriate and a waste of resources and also just kind of traumatizing for these families. And it begs the question of, well, what if a different human being, especially if these different human beings have been recently hired with campaign rhetoric of join the deportation force or, that sort of rhetoric, which we are seeing from Homeland Security, makes a different determination than a different officer of the United States government made a few years earlier. And you have someone who thought they were safe, that they were settled, that they were rebuilding their lives, that is now at risk of deportation to a country where they say that they had fled from persecution. That in itself was troubling enough. But then what happened 2 weeks ago, nearly 2 weeks ago, the weekend of January 9th, was instead of getting letters in the mail, these particular families in Minnesota, and again, the commonalities are they were resettled during the Biden administration. They do not yet have their green cards, although at least the cases that we're familiar with through our affiliate there, World Relief's affiliate in Minnesota, they had actually all applied for their green cards. They'd submitted their green card applications. And one of the reasons they don't have their green cards is because the Department of Homeland Security halted all processing of refugee green cards last November. So in a normal time, they might have their green cards by now, but they stopped processing those. And basically, ICE began showing up at people's homes. And knocking on the door, and if they're allowed in, some people know under the law they have the right to not let someone in if they don't have a judicially signed warrant. But if someone let ICE in because they didn't think they had anything to fear, they've done everything right, they've followed the law. In some cases where we've been told that the officers misrepresented who they were, so they're using kind of false premises to get them to open the door. And then once allowed in, they detained them, brought them to a detention facility there in Minnesota, and then usually within 24 to 48 hours had moved them to Texas. And by this, it impacts single adults. It also impacts children. We're aware both of situations where entire families have been detained and situations where maybe a dad was caught, leaving for work. At this point, I think most resettlement agencies in Minnesota are advising people to not go to work, to not go to school, to not go to church, but to not leave their homes because this is a very real risk that you'll be detained and sent to Texas. We have just in the last few days, first of all, we're aware of several of these cases when they've been able to communicate with their resettlement agency or with a volunteer. We also know that there are probably more cases that we don't know about. In one of our cases, someone had actually memorized the telephone number of an employee of our affiliate and was able to make that phone call. Had he not done so, he wouldn't have known, his phone was taken from him. So he doesn't know how to get in touch with someone. So we actually don't know fully the scale of this, but across the different resettlement agencies, we definitely think it's dozens, probably well more than that at this point. We are starting to see people released in Texas in some cases. In some cases, attorneys are filing petitions for habeas corpus, which is a right under the law. In some cases, they are going through additional interviews in Texas. I think I'm uncomfortable telling you exactly what's happening because we have a few data points, but it's hard to know if there's a process here. Sometimes they're held in Houston, sometimes they're interviewed in Houston and then moved to a different detention center elsewhere in Texas. They do seem to treat single adults and families with children a little bit different, but in both cases, not allowed to leave. And then in a few cases, they have been released. And as you said, they've been released and they're not providing transportation back to Minnesota. So in some cases, people have had their IDs, have been able to buy a plane ticket, or a family member or friend has been able to buy them a plane ticket. The resettlement agencies in Minnesota are doing their best to coordinate with those in Texas to provide support. We've also been aware of people being released without their IDs. So you can't even get on an airplane, even though you are still lawfully present, but you don't have your ID, or even like a Greyhound bus, you need ID to travel. So we've had, people have had to drive down to pick up their loved ones all the way from Minnesota to Texas. And I do think it's really important to just, we're really concerned at World Relief about immigration enforcement in general. We think that there are better legislative solutions for someone who's undocumented, who's been here for 30 or 40 years. But we also do know that this is anyone who's undocumented knows that there's some element of risk. We may think it's wrong, but we've never said that that's illegal for ICE to pick someone up who is undocumented. I think it's wrong to end temporary protected status abruptly for someone from Venezuela or Haiti. But whether the administration has that legal authority, the courts have been testing that question, but at least it is in the realm of the executive's authority to make that decision if they do so appropriately. We've been telling refugees for the last year that if you have refugee status, unlike those with temporary protected status, unlike those with humanitarian parole, unlike those who may be undocumented, if you have refugee status, you don't have anything to worry about. You are lawfully here. There's no expiration date on your legal status. You should file for your green card the way that you're supposed to. But even if it takes them a while to approve it, you're still here lawfully. You're authorized to work. You don't have anything to worry about. And frankly, that turned out to be incorrect. There was something to worry about. And we are very much concerned. This has started in Minnesota, but that is the language of Homeland Security's press releases. They're initially focusing on this group of Minnesota. We're very concerned that it will move elsewhere in the country as part of this broader process that they've announced to re-adjudicate the refugee determination for all refugees resettled under the Biden administration.
Thank you, Matt, so much. And you're right. It is so heartbreaking because it has been for many of us, to say to folks, this category is still protected. We're so thankful that these most vulnerable folks are still being protected. It's been so heartbreaking to see this new development. I'm going to let folks ask some questions. So enter questions in the chat as you have them, and we'll get them fed over if we haven't answered them yet already in our conversation. But Matt, just to kick us off in the Q&A portion, before we lose you, because I know you're also off to your next sharing as well. And so we're thankful you could spend a few minutes with us. But if we are ourselves someone who might be targeted for a reverification and or a sponsor or friend, what should we expect next? What do we need to know, and what should we be prepared for?
Yeah, so I mean, there's good resources out there. I know we have resources on the World Relief website for refugees themselves and for other immigrants, just understanding what their rights and responsibilities are under the law. That includes nobody, whether you're a citizen or not, has to open the door when a stranger comes to the door unless they have a judicially signed warrant. And hopefully, ICE continues to respect that legal standard that they don't have the authority to, come into a door if not invited in. But I mean, unfortunately, we've even had to kind of warn people like, if you don't know someone, don't open the door without a judicially signed warrant. Even if, someone sent you a pizza you didn't expect or whatever the story is, like I would advise someone just know your rights in that situation. For those who are volunteers, who are friends, it's such an important time to check in on your friends. And not just in Minnesota, of course. And I would say we're so amazed by the way that the community in the Twin Cities and elsewhere in Minnesota, rural Minnesota as well, has come together. Churches,
Hmm.
delivering groceries and things like that. And we're helping raise resources for that at World Relief, both for our partners in Minnesota and preparing for this in other places as well. For that, like, how do you support a family that has suddenly lost their primary income because they're afraid to go out to their job?
Mm.
Um, at the same time, we also are thinking, how do we help ensure that as many people as possible have legal support if this does happen, or even if they are just called to an interview at the USCIS office, that they have legal representation to
Mm.
accompany them. So we're ramping up for that and are really grateful for the support. I mean, we've seen people step up and, help families stay together in any way that
Mhm.
we can.
Mm.
Um, but I think on the basic level, I mean, it's an important time. Send that text message, make a phone call, let people know. You don't want to scare them, but you've heard of what's happening, and you love them. You care that they're here. They belong here as much as the rest of us do. And I think that is just really important for people not to feel quite so isolated right now as well.
Yeah, so important, Matt. One of the things that I've heard someone say, and I've taken to think a lot about and spread to my friends and others that I work with, look for who's missing, what's missing, right? When we start to notice that kids in our children's classrooms are not coming to sporting events, are not coming to class regularly. We notice the parents are not at pickup. We notice groceries are as you said, people are not at the grocery store. We don't see our neighbors outside much. Think about the things that tend to be missing and reach out and see if there's a way that you can support. Also, there's a lot of ways that people can support with their advocacy. They can figure out how their congregation could partner with a World Relief, uh, find out more about the Evangelical Immigration Table. What are the resources for congregations or for leaders and from faith communities and for denominational groups? There's also tons of advocacy they can do directly with their members of Congress. There's a lot Congress can do. To your great point, the best thing we can do here is to press for permanent solutions that help to protect communities. And so, thank you so much for saying those things. We do have a few other questions that have come in, Matt, and I know you got to go soon, so we're gonna take just a few more. Um, let me go through this quickly. Um, what about green card holders? Folks that already have their green card are not yet naturalized, I think is where this question is going. A green card holder who came through the refugee process. Anything you'd share there?
Yeah, yeah. Again, a year ago, I would have told you, if you're a green card holder and you don't commit crimes and you don't leave the country for extended periods of time, it's lawful permanent residence. You have nothing to worry about. I would feel less comfortable saying that right now. I mean, I think at this point, what we have seen in terms of people being detained are refugees who do not yet have their green cards, who are in that process, in most cases, of applying for their green cards. But what the administration, what DHS announced back in November, was that they would be reassessing the refugee status of all refugees resettled, which would include those, who came 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, who probably already do have their green cards in many cases. And I would hope that this will not affect them, but I don't know that we can promise that the administration won't try. Now, like, is that legal? It is generally not legal to detain someone who's a lawful permanent resident without cause, without, if there's allegation of criminal activity, something like that, that's a totally different case. But again, at least in the cases we're aware of, it's refugees who do not yet have their green cards, we have no reason to think have been charged with any sort of criminal activity, and from a bunch of different countries of nationality. I mean, from Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe. We've not seen exceptions in terms of country of origin. So like there's been a lot of focus on the Somali community, and we're deeply concerned about this. Somalis are about 35% of the refugees resettled to Minnesota in the last 4 years. That, of course, is not most. It is the plurality. It's more than any other single nationality. In Minnesota, that wouldn't be true nationally, where it would be the Congolese, would be the top nationality nationally in the last few years, and the Burmese, if you go back further. But it is actually people from all over. And so does this affect those with green cards? We've not seen that yet. We are going to keep advocating. I mean, I told my colleagues the other day, I'm afraid that this is just going to keep rolling out wider and wider, both in terms of geography and in terms of people who it targets, unless there's such a vocal, respectful, peaceful, but vocal public pushback with the American people saying, this is not what we wanted. Did we want secure borders? Yes. Did we want people who are convicted of violent crimes detained and deported? Most of us fully affirm that. But did we want lawfully present refugees who fled persecution in their own countries of origin for reasons like their faith or their political opinion or their race to then be further persecuted in the United States of America? Absolutely not. That's not who we are. And I genuinely believe it's a very small share of Americans who, if they understand what is actually happening right now, think that is a good thing that we should share.
Yeah, yeah. I've got two more, Matt, and then I'm going to let you go. We've got a lot of questions, but I think I can group a few of them. Several questions about SIV holders being detained and SIV holders being targeted. Anything you want to share on that, Matt?
Yeah, so just for background, special SIVs are special immigrant visas. It's actually a form of a green card. So if somebody has their special immigrant visa, they already have their green card. And it's specifically under the law for individuals from Afghanistan or Iraq who have served the U.S. mission in those countries. So usually alongside the military or maybe other parts of the U.S. government. A lot of translators, for example. In recent years, this has primarily been from Afghanistan, though also from Iraq in years past. On the one level, those individuals do have their green cards. Where we've seen a ton of challenges is people who were in process for their special immigrant visa. And some of those people were allowed in with humanitarian parole. At this point, in November, there was this awful attack in DC that was allegedly perpetrated by someone who had come in with humanitarian parole from Afghanistan. The response to that was to punish effectively Afghans across the board, and frankly, people from like many other countries of nationality as well, who have nothing to do with Afghanistan, by halting all immigration processing, halting asylum processing, because this individual had been granted asylum as well before he was able to gain a special immigrant visa, sort of multiple processes towards legal status. But at this point, we have seen future special immigrant visas halted, which I think is very concerning and effectively abandoning our country's commitment to people who put themselves at risk for the U.S. military. Whether or not this will go, I mean, we have seen some cases of special immigrant visas being sort of reassessed as well. I think that's a concern. It is still a lawful status. But again, some of what I would have said a year ago of like what can't happen,
Yeah.
I feel less confident stating right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Okay. Our friend Rebecca Santana is on, and she's asking for us to review the numbers question one more time. So do we have the numbers again of folks being re-interviewed in the Minneapolis area? I think I would call that Minnesota. 5,600 are eligible from what I've heard. And then do we have a number of how many have been sent to to Texas for detention?
Yeah, the 5,600 is the number that the Homeland Security has shared that they are initially targeting, and that is their word of initially, who do not have their green cards. How many of them have currently been detained? I do not think anyone has a good count on that. I don't think the government is sharing that information. And I think we know how many of the people that we have become aware of are in that category, from our affiliate there in Minnesota. And then the other resettlement agencies are, talking to each other. But I think we would all say that there's likely cases that we have not become aware of, where someone maybe isn't answering the phone. Does that mean that ICE picked them up, or just that they aren't answering the phone? We don't always know that. And so I don't think anyone has a hard number. And and relatedly, like, is the question of, is this legal? Again, I would have told you 3 weeks ago it's not. But I think this will probably be tested in the courts. I don't know generally when something like this happens, someone will likely file a legal action testing it. And what we have seen is individuals are having attorneys file habeas corpus
Yeah.
petitions under the law to say that's basically a
Yeah.
Latin term for you need to show a reason that you need to detain this person.
Hmm. So the final question I think we'll take is who in Congress is standing up on this? And so I think we can take that one. I can help you on that one. But before we take that and close, Matt, where can folks find resources, both from World Relief, the Evangelical Immigration Table? Do you want to share that now before we close out with this last piece of what Congress can do and what folks are doing?
Yeah, so definitely the Evangelical Immigration Table. We've got especially really for churches and individuals for like discipleship resources in particular. So that just evangelicalimmigrationtable.com, and that's a network that World Relief is a part of with a number of other evangelical Christian organizations. Specifically at the World Relief website, so worldrelief.org, folks can find an opportunity to give. They can find opportunities to advocate. We have a statement for Christians in particular to send to members of Congress that we're nearing 10,000 signatures on, and that has been, most of us have been in the last few days. We would love help getting that above 10,000, and then we'll send it on to Congress and to the White House. We have other advocacy tools there as well. And then there are also kind of best practices for understanding your rights and responsibilities for those who think they could be affected by this, whether they're refugees or other categories of immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
So all those are at worldrelief.org.
Thank you for that, Matt. And so I'll take my stab at answering this question, and I'll let you finish, and we'll let folks move on. So there are lots of members of Congress across the political spectrum that care about refugees. And as we talked about earlier, I think Max did a good job at specifically calling out, the classification of individuals as we speak about, of course, with the refugee process. There has been really widespread support for so long across both political parties. We still have a lot. This particular operation is only, as Matt said, almost 2 weeks old, although it feels like an eon, and because many of us haven't slept through the last couple of weeks responding to this. But so we will see members start to figure out what they can work on in a bipartisan, bicameral way. There are other solutions that are out there for similar communities. As we talked about Afghans on humanitarian parole, the Afghan Adjustment Act has been introduced in three Congresses, and it has lots of bipartisan support. And that would be a wonderful piece that could continue to support one of the groups that have immigrated through a humanitarian pipeline. Although we will see lots of members, I think, come together. There's a lot of other opportunities as well. There's lots of members that are working on solutions right now to protect some longtime contributors and other folks who are in the country and do not have criminal background and are contributing. And so there's other packages out there that a lot of folks are working on. And there's a lot of really robust bipartisan conversations. There's the Dignity Act that two members of the House have introduced in the last two Congresses. And so there's a lot of opportunities out there, a lot of support. And I think one of the things that we can advocate for the most is that members of Congress and the administration do as Americans would like us to do. We do polling constantly, and we find that nearly 80% of Americans want, the administration and Republicans and Democrats all to work together to only deport violent criminals, to help for pathways that are humanitarian, work visas, and other legal pathways to keep those that are here and contributing, and for the most vulnerable to be protected, which is one of the legacies of our great country. And so, Matt, that's what I would say. What would you say in closing?
Yeah, I would affirm all that. I think this is so new, and I honestly think a lot of people are not aware of it, even in Congress. I've encountered people who are like, "Are you sure that's actually happening? Like, can that happen?" And again, legally, I don't think it can happen, but it is happening. And it's happening to children. I think, and it's happening in the context of a lot of other really horrific things happening in Minnesota with immigration enforcement. And I do think it kind of gets lost that this is actually an escalation. This is something that in Chicagoland, where I live, we've experienced really rough immigration enforcement that has been very troubling, separated a lot of families, but we didn't necessarily see refugees targeted. So this is something new. I would love to see members of Congress asked by their constituents and by journalists, what do they think about this? I don't know how they would defend it. But I don't know that a lot of them have actually been asked about this dynamic, and some of them may not even realize it's happening.
All right, so a great opportunity for us all to advocate.
Yes.
Matt Sorens, thank you so much for being with us. Max Feinberg, our friend who had to flee the snowstorm, and we're glad that he was with us. Thank you all for joining us, for working alongside us, and lifting your voice, whether you're from faith, law enforcement, national security, business, or any of the other perspectives. Thank you for being with us to hear more about the value of immigrants and immigration to our nation, specifically refugees today. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you all soon.
Wow.